The billionaire's contract bride who taught him to feel again. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had been falling for hours, painting silver streaks on the glass walls of the downtown cafe. Mark Davis sat by the window, his black coffee untouched, his fingers tapping nervously against the cup. At 23, he carried more weight than most men, twice his age, final year of law school, a dying mother at home, and a mountain of debt left behind by his late father. The screen of his cracked phone glowed with another rejection email. His chest tightened. The cafe door chimed and in walked a woman whose presence cut through the sound of rain. Eleanor Brooks' sharp gray eyes, silver hair pinned flawlessly, the kind of woman whose confidence filled the room before she spoke. She moved with precision, her tailored suit whispering of power and wealth. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice slow but firm, "thank you for coming." Mark blinked. He had never met her before. "I am sorry, have we met?" Eleanor smiled faintly, sliding a leather folder onto the table. "Not yet. But I know who you are. I know your situation. The debts. The overdue tuition. The medical bills." His blood ran cold. "How do you know all that?" She leaned closer, the scent of jasmine and rain surrounding her. "Because I make it my business to know the people I invest in." Mark frowned. "Invest?" Eleanor opened the folder. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, thick, ivory-colored, with his name typed neatly across the top. "I am offering you a proposal, Mr. Davis. Marry me." Mark let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said calmly, eyes unwavering. "This is not about love. It is a contract. In exchange, I will pay off every debt you owe. Your mother's treatment. Your tuition. All of it." The cafe seemed to shrink around him. "Why me?" "Because you are young, unmarried, and smart enough to know that not every marriage is built on romance," she replied, her tone softened, just slightly. "I do not need affection, Mark. I need a companion. Someone to stand beside me, nothing more." The words hung in the air, surreal and heavy. Rain drummed harder against the window. "You cannot be serious," he said quietly. Eleanor's gaze never wavered. "I am. Think of it as a deal, Mr. Davis. Sign this contract, and your life changes tonight." For a moment, all he could hear was the rain, the heartbeat in his ears, and the rustle of that paper between them. One signature could erase his pain, but at what cost? The clock on the cafe wall ticked louder. Somewhere in his chest, pride and desperation began a silent war. "If I agree," he asked finally, "how long would it last?" 1 year, Eleanor answered without hesitation. "After that, you are free." Her lips curved into a quiet, confident smile. "But I have a feeling that freedom may not mean what you think it does." She pushed the pen across the table. It stopped inches from his hand. The storm outside cracked with thunder, and in that moment, Mark Davis realized his life would never be the same again. Mark could not sleep that night. The sound of rain still echoed in his ears as he sat by the dim light of his small apartment. The paper Eleanor Brooks had placed before him lay open on the table, her signature already at the bottom, waiting for his. The ink gleamed under the yellow lamp like a promise and a threat. He thought of his mother in the next room, asleep, her breathing shallow. The doctor's bills stacked on the counter. The overdue tuition notice pinned to the fridge. Every path led to the same wall. Maybe this contract was not madness. Maybe it was mercy. When dawn came, he found himself walking through the fog toward Brooks Bistro, the place where it all began. Eleanor was already there, her coffee untouched, her posture straight as if she had not moved since last night. "You decided," she said without looking up. Mark took a deep breath. "I will do it." She met his eyes for the first time that morning, a quiet satisfaction flickering across her features. "Good. We will keep it discreet. The ceremony will be small. My lawyer will handle the papers. You will receive the transfer by tonight." He nodded slowly, feeling the invisible weight of a new life settle onto his shoulders. "What happens after?" "You move into my estate," she said simply. "Appear with me when required. Follow the terms, and you will never have to worry about money again." That afternoon, Mark stood before the courthouse clerk in a suit Eleanor's assistant had delivered to his door. The jacket fit perfectly, though he could not remember the last time he had worn anything that clean. The room smelled faintly of old wood and rain-soaked wool. Eleanor stood beside him, immaculate in ivory silk. The vows were brief, the words transactional. No music, no flowers, no family. Just ink, paper, and silence. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Eleanor turned to him, extending her gloved hand. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis." Her tone was calm, unreadable. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance as they stepped into her waiting car. The city blurred past the window, and Mark felt a strange mix of gratitude and grief. He glanced at the ring on his finger. It gleamed but felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. The car turned through iron gates and rolled up a long driveway lined with ancient oaks. The mansion loomed ahead, its stone facade glowing under the wet twilight. "Home," Eleanor said softly as they stopped before the grand entrance. The word sounded foreign on her lips. Inside, the foyer was a cathedral of marble and glass. Paintings of ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following him as he walked. A maid appeared, bowing slightly. "Good evening, Mrs. Brooks." "Mr. Davis." The title felt strange, like an ill-fitting coat. Eleanor led him upstairs, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "You will stay in the East Wing," she said, pausing by a large oak door. "Meals are at 7. I prefer quiet. Do not enter my study without invitation." Mark nodded, overwhelmed by the cold elegance around him. "Understood." She turned, her expression unreadable. "This arrangement benefits us both. Keep it professional, and it will go smoothly." Then she walked away, her silhouette disappearing down the hall. Mark stepped into his room. It was beautiful but empty, like a museum display of someone else's life. Through the window, the storm had finally stopped, leaving drops of water glistening on the glass. He loosened his tie and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the contract folded neatly in his pocket. He had done it. His debts would vanish. His mother would live. Yet, as he looked around the silent mansion, he felt a strange ache settle in his chest, the kind that money could never ease. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 7 times, echoing through the hallways like a reminder. The deal had begun. The first week in the Brooks estate passed like a dream. Mark could not wake from. The mansion was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant ticking of antique clocks. Every sound felt amplified in the emptiness. The maids moved like ghosts, their footsteps barely audible. The food was served on silver platters, but Mark could hardly taste it. Every evening at exactly 7 he sat across from Eleanor at the long dining table so wide they could have spoken in whispers, and still not heard each other. She never ate much and never asked questions. Her tone was polite but distant, always the same. "Good evening, Mr. Davis. Did you have a productive day?" Mark learned quickly that the right answer was always short. "Yes, Mrs. Brooks, thank you." After dinner she disappeared into her study, the door closing softly behind her. He could hear faint piano music from within. Beautiful but cold. Mark tried to fill his days by exploring the estate. He found a library larger than his college campus, filled with books that smelled of leather and time. He spent hours there reading case law volumes and trying to remind himself why he had gone to law school in the first place, but every time he looked up and saw the chandelier Reflecting in the polished floor, he remembered the truth. He was not a guest, he was a contract. One afternoon the head maid Mrs. Lang knocked on his door. "Madam requests your presence in the garden." Mark followed her through the glass corridor. The sunlight poured in through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The garden stretched endlessly, roses and fountains and marble statues. Eleanor stood near a stone arch, her hair glinting silver in the light. "You are free to walk the grounds as you please," she said without turning. "But if reporters approach you, do not speak to them." Mark frowned. "Reporters? My family enjoys attention. I do not. You will understand in time." She glanced at him, then back to the roses. "I trust you can handle yourself in public. We have an event next week, the annual Brooks Foundation Gala. You will attend as my husband. It will be our first appearance together." The word husband still felt foreign. He nodded. "Understood." She studied him for a moment, her gaze unreadable. "You are young, Mr. Davis. Do not let the noise of this world make you forget who you are." For a brief second something human flickered behind her eyes, then vanished. "That will be all." That night Mark lay awake staring at the ceiling. The more he saw of her, the less he understood. She was precise but unpredictable, distant but sometimes almost kind. He wondered what had driven a woman like her to such loneliness. The following week came quickly. The mansion buzzed with preparations. Stylists arrived, florists, decorators, security guards, everyone moved with purpose. When the evening of the gala finally arrived, Eleanor appeared at the top of the grand staircase wearing a gown of silver silk, her hair swept into a perfect knot, her diamond earrings catching the light. Mark stood waiting in a tailored tuxedo. He barely recognized himself. "You clean up well," she said quietly, offering her arm. He took it, unsure whether to smile. "Remember," she whispered as they stepped into the waiting limousine, "speak little, smile when needed, and never forget you are my husband for tonight." The gala hall glittered with gold chandeliers and laughter. Photographers turned as they entered, flashes of light exploding like fireworks. Eleanor moved gracefully through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. Mark followed a step behind, feeling every stare, every whisper. The orchestra played softly and waiters drifted between tables carrying champagne. Eleanor leaned closer and murmured, "Now you understand why I avoid these events." He glanced at her. "They adore you. They adore the name," she corrected. The evening stretched long until an older man approached, smiling too broadly. "Eleanor, you never told us you remarried," he said, his eyes sliding to Mark. "And so young too." The crowd around them chuckled. Mark felt heat rise to his face, but Eleanor simply smiled, poised and unshaken. "Age has its benefits," she said, "but youth keeps life interesting." The man laughed and moved on, leaving Mark stunned. She had just defended him in public, not as a contract but as a husband. For the first time that night their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the faint spark of understanding. As the orchestra swelled and cameras flashed, Mark realized that the deal he had signed might turn out to be the most unpredictable chapter of his life. The weeks after the gala brought a strange rhythm into Mark's life. Every morning began with the sound of footsteps in the hallway, soft voices outside his door, and the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the mansion. Eleanor kept to her routines, precise as clockwork, while Mark tried to find a place in a world that did not feel like his. He learned to navigate her silences, to understand that when she said, "I prefer quiet," it meant she needed the noise of her own thoughts to fill the emptiness. They shared meals in formality, yet sometimes, when the air turned softer, she would ask him small things about his mother's health, his studies, the city outside her gates. Those brief moments were enough to remind him there was still a person behind her armor. One Sunday afternoon, Eleanor appeared at the library doorway. "You read a lot," she said. "Habit," he replied. "Law leaves little room for imagination." She tilted her head. "Imagination builds empires, Mr. Davis. Remember that." It was the closest thing to warmth he had heard from her. Later that week, a letter arrived from the hospital. His mother's condition had worsened. Mark asked Eleanor if he could visit her. She agreed without hesitation, surprising him. "Take the car," she said. "Family comes first." The next morning, as he prepared to leave, he found a sealed envelope on the passenger seat. Inside was a check covering the hospital's costs for 6 months. No note, no signature, only the initials E.B. His chest tightened. That evening, when he returned, she was in the music room playing the piano. He stood silently at the doorway, listening. The melody was slow, mournful, filled with longing. When she stopped, she said without turning, "You should not linger in doorways, Mr. Davis. It makes you look like you are lost." "Maybe I am," he said. Her hands rested on the keys. "Then find something worth staying for." Her voice cracked slightly, almost imperceptibly. From that night on, Mark began to see her differently, not as the distant woman who had bought his future, but as someone trapped in her own walls. The next morning, Eleanor invited him to accompany her to a board meeting at Brooks Enterprises. The driver opened the car door, and she said quietly, "Smile, but say nothing unless asked." Inside the glass tower, everything gleamed: suits, screens, power. The directors greeted Eleanor with forced respect, their eyes sharp. An older man named Richard leaned back in his chair. "We were surprised to hear about your marriage," he said, smirking. "It seems unconventional." "Unconventional decisions built this company," she replied coolly. "If that bothers you, perhaps you should revise your definition of leadership." The room fell silent. Mark watched her command the table with effortless authority, but beneath her confidence, he sensed isolation. After the meeting, in the elevator, he said quietly, "They fear you." She gave a faint smile. "Fear keeps them loyal. Loyalty keeps me standing." The ride down was quiet except for the sound of her breathing, steady but weary. That night, dinner was different. Eleanor actually laughed once softly, at something he said about his college days. The sound startled both of them. "You should do that more often," Mark said. "What?" "Laugh." Her eyes lingered on him. "Careful, Mr. Davis. That almost sounds like affection." He met her gaze. "Maybe it is." The air froze between them, heavy and electric. She looked away first. "Do not confuse gratitude with love," she murmured. But even as she said it, her hand trembled when she lifted her glass. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, the same way it had the night they first met. The rain returned, washing the city clean. Somewhere deep down, Mark knew that this arrangement, once a transaction, was shifting into something neither of them had planned. And though neither dared say it aloud, the contract that bound them was slowly becoming something far more dangerous, a fragile beginning of the real thing. Autumn arrived quietly at the Brooks estate. The leaves turned copper and gold, drifting across the long driveway where the world outside rarely reached. For Mark, the days had begun to blur into something unfamiliar yet comforting. The woman he once feared had become someone he could almost understand. Eleanor still kept her routines, still carried herself like a queen behind glass, but the distance between them had thinned like mist at sunrise. One evening she found him in the library, asleep over a pile of books. A blanket covered his shoulders when he woke, though he had not put it there himself. Later, he saw her in the garden trimming roses. "You will ruin your suit," he said. "Then I will ruin it beautifully," she answered, her smile small but real. It was the first time he saw her without the mask of control, hands stained by the earth, eyes softer than before. But comfort was fragile in a house built on secrets. During breakfast one morning, Eleanor's assistant entered the dining room, her expression pale. "Ma'am, there are reporters outside the gate. They claim to have found something." Eleanor's fork froze above her plate. "What kind of something?" "A file, madam. About Mr. Davis." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Mark's heart dropped. "What file?" The assistant hesitated. "His financial records. Someone leaked that he accepted money before the marriage. They are implying this union was an arrangement." Eleanor's eyes hardened, but her voice stayed calm. "I see. Prepare a statement. We will handle this privately." Mark rose from his chair. "Eleanor, I swear I did not," she held up a hand. "Do not explain here." The staff left the room, leaving only the sound of the rain outside. She turned to him. "You should have been careful. The world loves a scandal." "You think I did this?" he asked, pain sharp in his voice. "I think someone wanted this," she said. "And you just made it easier." He stepped closer, desperate. "You said this was a contract. You cannot blame me for the rules you wrote." For the first time since he met her, she looked shaken. "I can blame you for making me forget them," she whispered. Before he could answer, she walked away, leaving him standing in the echo of her words. Within hours, headlines filled the internet, young husband of Brooks heiress exposed. Cameras flashed at the gates, voices shouted accusations. Eleanor withdrew from public view, ignoring every call. Mark tried to see her, but the staff said she was in her study, locked inside. On the third night, he left a note at her door, "I did not marry you for money. I stayed because I saw you." The note went unanswered. Days later, Eleanor appeared at the grand staircase, her face pale, her eyes hollow. "There will be a charity auction next week," she said evenly. "You will not attend. The board has advised distance until this dies down." Mark stood silent, fury and sorrow colliding. "So that is it? You erase me to protect your name?" "To protect what I built," she replied. "You do not understand what that costs." "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I know what loneliness costs." For a moment, her composure cracked. Her hand trembled against the railing. "Leave, Mark. Before I make this harder." He nodded slowly. "If that is what you want." He turned and walked out into the rain, the same way he had entered her life. The iron gates closed behind him, their sound echoing like an ending. But even as he drove away, a single image refused to leave his mind: Eleanor standing alone in the doorway, the woman who had everything yet looked like she had lost the only thing that mattered. In that silence, both of them knew that the contract might be ending, but the story between them was far from over. 2 weeks passed since Mark had left the Brooks estate. The city felt colder, emptier, as if the rain had followed him everywhere. He found a small apartment above an auto repair shop and returned to working nights to fill the silence. The headlines had finally faded, replaced by newer scandals, but the echo of Eleanor's voice still haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing at the top of the staircase, composed yet breaking inside. He told himself it was better this way. Their arrangement had ended. The debts were paid. The deal was done. And yet, every night, he reached for the space beside him and found nothing but air. One evening, as he was closing the garage, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Mrs. Lang, the Brooks housekeeper, holding an envelope. "Madam asked me to deliver this," she said softly. "She said you would understand." Mark took it hesitantly. Inside was a single photograph: Eleanor at the charity auction, alone under the spotlight, surrounded by guests who watched her with suspicion. Her expression was calm, but her eyes told another story: pain, pride, and something that looked too much like regret. On the back of the photo were 3 words in her handwriting: "I was wrong." His heart pounded. The next morning, he drove back to the estate. The gates were half open this time, and the guards let him through without question. The house looked different: curtains drawn, lights dim, like it was holding its breath. He found Eleanor in the greenhouse, surrounded by wilting roses. She looked up, startled but not angry. "You should not be here," she said. "You sent for me," he replied, holding up the photograph. She hesitated, her lips parting as if to deny it, then closed again. "I did," she admitted quietly. "I thought I could live without you. I was wrong." Mark stepped closer. "Then why did you let me go?" "Because loving you was never part of the plan," she said, her voice trembling. "And I am a woman who lives by plans." "Maybe that is the problem," he said. "You built your life like a business: calculations, contracts, contingencies, but love does not care about terms and conditions." She turned away, her shoulders tense. "You think it is that easy? You have no idea what I risk just standing here." "Then risk it," he said. "For once, do something without signing it first." Eleanor's breath caught. The storm that had been building inside her finally broke. "Do you know what it is like to lose everything because you trusted the wrong person?" she said, her voice cracking. "I do not let people in because every time I did, they left." Mark reached for her hand, hesitant. "Then let me be the one who stays." She stared at him, the walls around her crumbling one by one. You make promises too easily, she whispered. No, he said. I just finally found one worth keeping. The silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and rested her forehead against his. I do not know how to be what you need, she said. You already are, he answered. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady against the glass. For the first time, Eleanor did not pull away. They stood there, surrounded by dying roses and new hope, the air thick with the scent of earth and forgiveness. The contract that once bound them had become irrelevant, replaced by something unspoken but infinitely stronger. In that quiet greenhouse, among the echoes of their mistakes, they chose to begin again, not as a deal, not as an arrangement, but as two people finally brave enough to love without terms. The days that followed were unlike anything either of them had known. Eleanor and Mark settled into a rhythm that felt fragile but real, as if they were learning how to exist without the rules that once defined them. The contract was forgotten, the cold politeness replaced by quiet laughter over morning coffee and soft conversations in the garden. Mark began working remotely for a small legal firm, while Eleanor spent her time rebuilding her reputation after the scandal. Every evening, they met in the library, where she would read aloud and he would listen, his eyes following her voice more than the words. For the first time, the Brooks mansion felt alive. But peace in their world never lasted long. One afternoon, while Eleanor was in a meeting downtown, Mark received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was sharp and mocking. You think you won because she let you back in? Wait until tonight. The line went dead before he could reply. Hours later, as the sun sank behind the hills, news alerts began flashing across every screen. Brooks Enterprises faces insider trading accusations. Anonymous leak exposes board misconduct. The headlines spread like wildfire, and this time, Eleanor was not just the target, she was the accused. Mark found her sitting alone in her office when he arrived. Papers were scattered across her desk, her phone buzzing with unanswered calls. It is Richard, she said quietly. He has been trying to take control of the board for months. This is his move. Mark clenched his fists. We can fight this. We will clear your name. She looked up at him, exhausted. They will believe what they want. Men like Richard know how to twist the truth. Then let us untwist it, he said. You are not alone anymore. For the first time that night, she let out a shaky breath. I spent my whole life building this company. If I lose it, I lose the last piece of myself. Mark knelt beside her. You will not lose yourself. You will just find who you really are when the noise is gone. She stared at him, her composure breaking. Why do you stay, Mark? After everything? Because you taught me that love is not a contract. It is a choice. And I choose you. She pressed her lips together, fighting tears. The clock struck midnight, echoing through the room. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the windows as if the world itself was testing them. Tomorrow, Mark said, we confront him. Together. Eleanor nodded slowly. For the first time, she was not the woman commanding from behind a desk. She was a woman who had something to lose and someone who refused to let her face it alone. As they stood side by side in the dim light of her office, the storm raged, but neither of them moved. Whatever was coming next, they would face it together, not as a deal, not as a performance, but as two people bound not by papers, but by something far more powerful. The next morning arrived with a sharp chill in the air. Reporters gathered outside the Brooks building, their cameras flashing like lightning against the glass. Inside, the tension was heavier than the clouds that hung over the city. Eleanor stepped out of the elevator, calm and composed, though Mark could see the storm behind her eyes. She wore a charcoal suit, simple yet commanding, and in her hand she carried a single folder. Are you ready? He asked. She gave a faint smile. I was born ready for battles like this. I just never expected to fight one with someone by my side. Together they walked into the boardroom. Every seat was filled. The directors whispered among themselves, papers rustling, eyes darting toward Eleanor as if waiting for her to fall. At the head of the table sat Richard, his smug grin barely contained. "Eleanor," he began, "such a shame we must meet under these circumstances. The board deserves answers. And they will have them," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. "But first, let me clarify something. Loyalty and greed do not belong in the same room. You will soon see which of those you represent." Richard chuckled. "Still dramatic as ever. But this time, it will not save you. The evidence is clear. You approved the trades personally." He slid a stack of documents across the table. Mark stepped forward. "Actually, that evidence was falsified," he said. "The timestamps were altered, and the email authorizations came from an external IP address traced to Richard's assistant." The room fell silent. Eleanor opened the folder in her hand and placed several photographs on the table. "Security footage," she said, her tone sharp as glass. "Your assistant accessing my office 3 nights before the leak. You wanted control of the foundation, and you almost had it. But you made one mistake: you underestimated me." Richard's smile faded, his face draining of color. "You cannot prove anything." "I already have," Eleanor said. She turned toward the legal counsel at the table. "The authorities have the rest. You will be hearing from them shortly." The counsel's phone buzzed on cue. The color drained further from Richard's face as he was escorted out of the room by 2 security guards. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the board members began to applaud. It started softly, then grew, until the entire room echoed with the sound of vindication. Eleanor stood still, her chin high, her hands trembling only slightly at her sides. When it was over, she turned to Mark. "It is done," she said, almost in disbelief. "You did it," he whispered. She shook her head. "We did it." Outside, the storm clouds began to break, light spilling through the windows. The reporters waiting below caught sight of Eleanor as she stepped outside, her posture strong but her eyes searching. Mark followed, staying close but letting her take the lead. Cameras flashed, questions shouted, but she did not answer. Instead, she reached for his hand quietly, deliberately, and held it in front of everyone. The gesture was simple, but it said everything. She was no longer hiding behind wealth or reputation. The woman who once turned love into a contract now stood free of all terms. The world had tried to define her, but in that moment, she defined herself. Weeks later, the Brooks Foundation hosted its annual charity gala, this time under a clear sky. The same hall that once held whispers of scandal now overflowed with applause and laughter. Eleanor moved through the crowd with renewed grace, no longer a figure of power alone, but of redemption. Her name had been cleared, her company secured, and for the first time in years, her heart was unguarded. Mark stood near the stage, adjusting his tie, watching her with quiet pride. When she noticed him, her expression softened in a way only he could see. The host announced her to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Eleanor Brooks Davis, for her closing address." She stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady yet warm. "A few months ago, I stood in this same hall, unsure of who I was or what I believed in. I had everything the world could offer, yet I had never felt more alone. But then, life has a strange way of humbling us. It teaches us that strength is not found in control, but in courage, the courage to trust, to forgive, and to begin again." She paused, her eyes finding marks in the crowd. "Tonight, this foundation is not just about wealth. It is about second chances. About kindness. About love that is earned, not purchased." The audience erupted in applause, but Eleanor was no longer speaking to them. She stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward Mark. As the crowd parted, the room fell into a hush. He met her halfway, his heart pounding. "Eleanor," he whispered, "you were incredible." "So were you," she said, her eyes bright. Then, to his astonishment, she took his hand, turned to the audience, and said, "There is one more announcement." From her pocket, she pulled out a small velvet box. The crowd gasped, and Mark froze. "The contract that began our story has long expired," she said softly, opening the box to reveal a simple gold ring. "But tonight, I want to sign a new one written not on paper, but in promise." She looked up at him. "Mark Davis, will you stay, this time for real?" For a moment, the world stood still. Then Mark smiled, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. "I never left," he said. Laughter and applause filled the room as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The orchestra began to play, and Eleanor leaned in, whispering, "No more contracts." "No," he murmured, "only forever." Outside, the city lights shimmered against the night, reflecting off the glass windows like scattered stars. Hand in hand, they walked out into the cool evening, no longer bound by duty or fear, but by the quiet certainty of love freely chosen. The story that began as a transaction had become a testament that true partnership is not written in ink but lived in action. And as the music faded behind them, Eleanor Brooks and Mark Davis stepped into their new life, proving that love begins where the deal ends.